Hi, everybody. Thanks. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to give it a couple minutes to let participants join in just because I had a tech issue on my side that I needed to sort out. So we'll give it a couple minutes. Thank you all for joining us. This is actually one of the biggest Indigenous Caucus webinars. We had 107 people register for the webinar, so I'm super excited, and I'm glad everybody's ready to start the new year with us and some really great information. It looks like most folks are in now, so I will get started, and then folks can come in. So again, thanks and hello everybody, and welcome to today's webinar with CMHC, who will be providing an update on Indigenous housing initiatives. I hope you all had a safe and happy holiday season. Many of you know me, but my name is Steve Sutherland. I am the manager for the Indigenous Caucus of the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association. Before we begin today, I'll provide a quick a quick overview of the webinar technology, and then I'll pass it over to Romy, Lindsay, and Krista. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the land that we are currently in. I'm in Quebec, Gatineau, to be more precise, which is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. As all of you are joining us today from many places near and far, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands as well. And we do this to reaffirm our commitment and our responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. Today's webinar is in real time, so you should be able to see the speakers and hear me via however your speakers are set up or your telephone if you've chosen to dial in. You're all muted. We do this to minimize background noise. If you wish to ask any questions or make any comments, you can type them in the Q&A box on the control panel at any time during the presentation, and we'll address as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar. I'd like to introduce the speakers for today's panel. Joining us today, we have Romy Bowers, Senior Vice President of Client Solutions, Lindsay Neeley, Director of Housing Solutions for Indigenous and the North, and Krista Taylor, Senior Manager, FPT and Indigenous Housing Policy. Thank you all for joining us today. That's all from me. Romy, the floor is yours.
Okay, yeah, thanks so much, Steve, and thanks for the invitation. It's a real pleasure for all of us to be here. And Lindsay and I, we have some prepared remarks that we're going to deliver to start off with, but then we want to open things up for question and answers, and we really look forward to getting some questions from your members, Steve, and we really look forward to that discussion as well. And we have Krista joining us, who is from our policy group, so we hope that we can answer questions related to both the delivery of the housing programs that we're responsible for, but also some of the policy development in the area of housing as well. So I just wanted to wish everyone a good afternoon, and just note that I am joining you virtually from Toronto. And Steve, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the land on which I work, and it is the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Métis, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. I'm very grateful for the invitation that I've been given to speak to you today. CMHC, we value the very strong relationships that we have with the CHRA, and in particular with the Indigenous Caucus. And we appreciate very much the great feedback and ideas that you've shared with us over the years. And we've particularly appreciate the partnership during these unprecedented times. I think the COVID pandemic has really reinforced the fact that housing is absolutely critical for everyone who lives in Canada. And CMHC, we're more committed than ever to deliver on our mandate and work in a more collaborative manner with all our partners. The pandemic definitely has definitely put a spotlight on the housing gaps and the very pressing needs that exist among the most vulnerable in our communities. And these vulnerabilities existed prior to the pandemic, but I think these have been made even more acute by the difficulties of the pandemic. There is a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel in terms of, I think, with the vaccine thing, there is hope that things will get back to normal, but there's no question that there have been loss of life and very severe impacts from the pandemic. And one silver lining that we hope is that it's placed a spotlight on the importance of housing and continued investment in housing. We've really thought at CMHC throughout the pandemic about our aspiration, which, as many of you know, is that by 2030, everyone in Canada has a home that they can afford and meets their needs. This is a CMHC's aspiration. It's our North Star, and it guides activities of all our employees. And in December, we had a discussion with our board, thinking about our strategy, our corporate strategy in greater depth, and thinking about the pandemics and some of the learnings there. And we have a renewed commitment, even though we are Canada's national housing agency, and we exist to serve all Canadians, but we have a particular interest in serving the housing needs of Canada's most vulnerable populations. One thing we added to our strategy statement is a commitment to advancing reconciliation with Indigenous peoples and increasing our support and partnerships with Indigenous housing providers. We are also focused on doing what we can to support support our climate change efforts, and also increasing the resiliency of our housing stock, so that the housing stock will last for generations to come. As an organization, we are prioritizing the need for experimentation of new ideas and solutions related to housing, in particular, improving the housing affordability for all Canadians. We believe that all new approaches to housing that we pursue as an organization must be informed by the lived experience of those in housing need. And our approaches will be grounded in a human rights based approach to housing and the principles of reconciliation. We are working towards the co-development of a reconciliation framework with Indigenous housing partners and a new Indigenous Advisory Council. And we believe that the aim of the reconciliation framework for CMHC should be to lay out very concrete actions and performance measures to track progress in closing the housing gap between Indigenous communities and other Canadians. The reconciliation framework at CMHC would touch on all facets of our company, from our employees to our culture, our programs, our business practices, and our relationships with Indigenous peoples and housing providers. You may already be aware, but we are currently in the process of establishing a new Indigenous Advisory Council at CMHC. And the objective is to seek the guidance of this council to co-create a reconciliation action plan to guide the review of our existing programs, policies, and business processes to better meet the needs of our Indigenous partners. We are committed to consulting with national Indigenous organizations to ensure that CMHC considers the unique needs of Indigenous peoples and addresses barriers to address problems that people encounter in accessing our housing programs and services. It is, as I mentioned previously, it is absolutely a huge priority for us to ensure that we understand the distinct housing needs of Indigenous peoples, to remove barriers and facilitate access to our existing funding programs and work to address the gaps that are within our services. Over the last 3 years since the launch of the National Housing Strategy, we have been working very hard to ensure that Indigenous partners are aware of the range of funding options that are available, and we want to ensure that our partners can access them to move forward with their housing projects. We acknowledge that we are not perfect, and there are many things that we need to address and improve on, and we are always open to suggestions and constructive criticism from our partners so that we can continue to improve and to deliver better and more effectively. I want to just spend a little bit of time talking about our latest housing initiative, which is the Rapid Housing Initiative. This was launched in October, and it involves an investment of $1 billion in capital contributions to create 3,000 permanent new units of affordable housing across Canada. And many of you are probably aware, but the funding is delivered through two streams. The first one is a major cities stream, and there's also a project stream. And there's $500 million of capital attributed to each stream. And the focus is on the construction of modular housing, as well as the acquisition of land and the conversion or rehabilitation of existing buildings to affordable housing. We have successfully signed agreements with 15 municipalities to deliver funding under the major city stream, and most of this funding, the $500 million, has already been dispersed. We received applications for the project stream up until January 1st, 2021, and we are in the process of reviewing the applications as we speak. As we anticipated, given the need, we've had an overwhelming response, and we've received hundreds of applications, including from many Indigenous communities and housing providers. Our team is taking great care to review all the applications and to prioritize those that have the highest social outcomes and serve the most vulnerable, specifically people who are at the most at risk of experiencing homelessness or living in temporary shelters because of the COVID-19 situation. There is also priority being given to projects that serve the needs of women and their children, Indigenous peoples, and other groups in very severe housing need. And as the name of the initiative suggests, it is meant to be a rapid response. So we plan to commit all the funding before March 31st of this year. And our goal is to ensure that the housing is actually available for occupancy within 12 months of the agreements being signed. We look forward to providing a more substantive update on the number of applications received from Indigenous partners and the projects that have been approved in the coming weeks. So the only thing I would highlight here is that the response from Indigenous housing providers have been tremendous, and I know a lot of people have put in time going through the application process, so I wanted to thank you for that. Turning to a second topic, I wanted to also talk to you about the shelter initiative. And again, as many of you know, we are in the midst of delivering a new shelter initiative that was announced in May 2020. The shelter initiative is also a pandemic-related funding response to help people who are at increased risk from domestic violence during this crisis. This is and with a particular focus on Indigenous women and children. There is $44.8 million available over 5 years, available to build 12 new shelters across Canada, including 10 in First Nations communities and 2 in the territories. We're currently reviewing the applications received during the first intake period, which closes tomorrow. And the selection committee, which is co-chaired with CMHC, ISK, and a National Indigenous Women's Organization, will approve projects for funding, and applicants will be notified by March 2021. In addition, in the federal government's November fall economic statement also signaled a commitment to support new shelters and transitional housing for Indigenous people across Canada. And we look forward to sharing some more details about this in the very near future as well. Turning to a third topic, this is the Housing Internship Initiative for First Nation and Inuit youth. This is another COVID-related measure that we have rolled out this year for additional funding for this very important initiative targeting Indigenous young people. This initiative is part of the federal government's Youth Employment and Skills Strategy led by ESDC. In September, CMHC received an additional $4 million for this program to support more Indigenous youth internships in the housing sector. These internships provide much needed work experience and on-the-job training to youth. As the only federal government initiative target towards supporting internships in the housing sector for Indigenous young people, we have consistently seen a high demand for this funding, and so far we have been able to complete over 400 job placements for Indigenous young people across Canada. So with that, I would like to, just in the second part of our prepared remarks, I wanted to turn the mic over to Lindsay Neeley, who is the Director of Indigenous and Northern Housing Solutions, and she's going to talk to you a little bit about some of the latest updates with respect to the National Housing Strategy. So Lindsay, if I could turn the mic over to you.
Of course, thank you so much, Romy, and hello everybody, bienvenue à tous. I'm joining you today from Ottawa on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. And I'd like to extend my respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples for their valuable past and present contributions to this land that I benefit and live on with my family today. Touching upon Romy's point about our commitment to doing more to support Indigenous and Northern housing, this has really only become stronger in the midst of the global pandemic and as we've ramped up our response to provide more support. Touching upon the Housing Internship Initiative, one key change that we made recently was to open it up from First Nations and Inuit youth to Métis youth and all Indigenous youth across the country. To ensure that we're really targeting the needs of all the Indigenous youth that are looking for employment at a time when jobs can be hard to find. And in addition to some of the COVID-related measures, we've made some structural and some process changes within CMHC to better support Indigenous partners and organizations in finding the right solution for their housing projects. And a key way that we've been trying to do that is by facilitating access to all of the programs that CMHC delivers under the National Housing Strategy. And I'm sure most of you are aware, there's more than $55 billion available under the National Housing Strategy over 10 years. And there are a number of federally delivered and programs delivered by provinces and territories. And Indigenous housing needs are prioritized across them all. And at CMHC, we have a dedicated team. I have the privilege of leading this team, the Indigenous and Northern Housing Solutions team. We have a team of specialists across the country that are available to work with partners and proponents to navigate all of the funding programs and assist with applications for each of the funding options that you'd like to pursue. And as a result of this team's been in place for about 18 months, maybe close to a year. We've been able to fund more projects quicker, including through programs like the National Housing Co-Investment Fund. And for those of you that are not as familiar with this fund or haven't had any experience working with us yet on this particular program, it is a signature initiative of the National Housing Strategy. There is $13.2 billion available over 10 years to support a wide range of housing projects and needs across Canada. And under this program, we prioritize all projects serving Indigenous housing needs and Northern housing needs. And applications are reviewed and approved by specialists within the Indigenous and Northern Housing Solutions team. So those that are familiar working in these communities and apply that lens when reviewing applications and making funding decisions. And this past year, I'm really pleased to tell you that we approved an unprecedented number of Indigenous and Northern projects for funding. Totaling 590 units and a commitment of $130 million. We've also been able to double our commitments for Indigenous housing projects under the Rental Construction Financing Initiative, which is another signature program of the National Housing Strategy. The Rental Construction Financing Initiative offers low-cost loans to build affordable housing projects in major urban areas across the country. And this past year, we committed $110 million to support 260 units. I'd like to share there's also been some pretty significant growth in terms of the seed funding that we've approved for Indigenous and Northern projects. This seed funding program is in place to support a wide range of pre-development costs to assist proponents in preparing for a larger financing application to either the co-investment fund or the Rental Construction Financing Initiative. And last year, we committed $7.3 million to help projects, new construction projects or repair projects. And we're able to support 4,783 units to hopefully add to the affordable housing supply serving Indigenous and Northern housing needs. So really a lot of growth and expansion happening, and we're really pleased with the progress so far, but of course, more to do. Another key thing that we've done within CMHC is that we have and we will continue to simplify our processes. And I'd like to thank all of you on the call for the role that you've played in contributing to these changes. We've heard a lot of feedback from members of CHRA and the Indigenous Caucus and other partners. And as Romy said, we welcome the continued feedback and constructive criticism. We're always striving to do better. We have made some pretty significant improvements to our application processes for some of our NHS programs. Perhaps you've seen that for those that have gone through the rapid housing application. It's a more simplified, streamlined application focused on getting a more timely funding decision for projects to address much needed housing. And we plan to continue working through these improvements for greater efficiency and effectiveness as we move into this year, 2021. And in particular, we focused on the National Housing Co-Investment Fund. And I hope that you're starting to see some of the benefits or the results of some of the changes that we've put in place. One key change is the introduction of a client readiness checklist to help applicants know upfront what is required prior to going through the lengthy application, so there are no surprises along the way. We've also heard from partners that having access to a team of Indigenous and Northern specialists is essential for navigating all of the application processes and funding options. So we are adding more specialists to our team, including an additional person to serve the territories. And we've also looked at how we prioritize and triage applications coming in so that we can make quicker funding decisions. And we're looking as well at our funding agreements to align with the size and complexity of projects so that we can use our resources most efficiently. Indigenous organizations can use their resources most efficiently, and we can provide a timely decision to enable your projects to move ahead. And we expect that overall, these process improvements will improve our turnaround times by 50%. So we're certainly seeing some benefits of the changes that have been made. And we have a commitment to continue working with you and to act on your feedback and be responsive to your needs as we work together to build solutions for Indigenous and Northern housing. Next, I'll just talk briefly about some of the Indigenous housing strategies underway, because we know that ultimately to advance reconciliation, we need housing strategies and solutions that are for Indigenous people, led by Indigenous people, and supported by CMHC. We're very much committed to working towards that approach. And as many of you know, we continue to support the co-development and implementation of various Indigenous housing strategies with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nation groups to support the transition to Indigenous self-determination, care, and control of housing. This work is being led by Indigenous Services Canada and Crown Indigenous Relations in Northern Affairs Canada, and CMHC is an active partner. We've also been working with the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples as part of a working group mandated to discuss barriers and policy priorities aimed at improving housing outcomes of affiliates of the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples and urban Indigenous peoples in general. And this working group is part of Canada's commitment to implement the CAP Canada Political Accord. So lots of work underway. We're also contributing to the House of Commons committee study of urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing that's underway, HUMA, for those familiar with the acronym. And we look forward to their report being released in the coming months with some key recommendations for the best ways of moving forward and addressing the gaps that exist in urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing. And as mentioned, we're pleased to continue to work with CHRA and the Indigenous Caucus. We're supportive of the proposals coming forward, calling for a fourth strategy, and look forward to supporting those efforts. So that's it from me. I'd just like to thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you today and to have a discussion about what's on your minds and answer any questions that you have about the information that we've shared. Thank you. Over to you, Steve. I think you're on mute.
Yeah, that word's going to carry over into 2021, I have a feeling. So Romy, Lindsay, and Krista, thank you so much. So if folks want to start entering questions, or you can raise your hand in the panelist bar there. I'm going to start with a question, actually, because you, Lindsay, brought up the HUMA committee and its study. I guess kind of an open question. If there was one recommendation that you would like to see come out of the committee's findings, is there something that you'd like to see?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And, you know, Romy, I think, has appeared a few times before the committee, and I joined her for one of the appearances, trying to share as much information as we can about the programs that are currently being delivered, the number of players involved in providing housing in urban, rural, and northern areas. And so this is my personal view. It would be really interesting for the committee to look to fill some of the data gaps that we've heard from CHRA and from other partners, just in terms of the needs. We have a better sense of what the needs are and the gaps in existing programs, but with the network of partners that are involved in providing housing, what's the best way for these partners to come together to form strategies to really focus on the solutions that are Indigenous led, supported by other levels of government, and how do they really get at those needs in a new way? And I think something that would be interesting to hear is, what are some of those new solutions that Indigenous partners want to see from the government, and how can we act on those?
Thanks, Lindsay. Romy, did you have, because you've appeared a couple of times, I've got to watch both the appearances. Was there anything that you'd like to add?
I know. I think. Well, I guess definitely. I think I support what Lindsay says. I do think. Again, I don't want to talk specifically about the specific recommendations, but I think it's a really a great thing to have hearings like that to increase awareness of the actual number of Indigenous people who live off reserve, and just the highlighting the acute housing need that exists among urban, rural, and northern Indigenous people, and it's great to see the parliamentarians engaged in that. It is a type of awareness raising, and seeing all the different. I don't actually watch all the different hearings, but I do read all the transcripts, and I think it's a great thing to hear the different voices at the table, and creating that awareness in the political community. And I do look forward to. It's great to hear all that, but then actually seeing the recommendations, I think that will be a great thing. And CMHC is. We're eager and ready to be at the table in being part of whatever the government directs us to, in terms of being part of the solution in co-developing solutions with Indigenous communities.
Thanks. So we've got a couple of questions that have come in, and then there are some hands raised as well. So I'll go with the written questions here first. Linda Boyer from PA Community Housing in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan asks if can nonprofits use one of the NHS funds to refinance their existing mortgages at banks and credit unions to a much lower one through the NHS? Mortgages for their projects make it very difficult to keep units affordable for those most in need.
So
Yes.
I don't know.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Linda. I don't know if you were going to answer this question or not.
Yeah, I was just going to say, without being familiar with that particular project, it's something that absolutely, Linda, I would suggest connecting with one of our specialists in Saskatchewan to talk about the particulars to see if it would be eligible under co-investment.
And then Jim Padden asks, could you discuss existing CMHC First Nations housing regarding how home ownership works and about repairs required to rental housing?
Sure. So if I understand the question, just a little bit more about the First Nations housing programs delivered by CMHC, which we didn't touch on, but great to see that there's some interest in that. So there are a couple of programs that CMHC has delivered for a number of years. One is the Section 95 housing program, which supports the new construction of rental social housing, primarily in First Nations communities. And there's also a residential rehabilitation assistance program that is focused on repair to existing housing stock on reserve. Those are programs that are available on an ongoing basis. In terms of home ownership, there is an initiative called the First Nation Market Housing Fund that incidentally has a new board of trustees. And that fund is focused on supporting access to homeownership for First Nations by providing a credit enhancement for First Nation borrowers seeking to own their own homes on reserve. And then in terms of, we also have, of course, our mortgage loan insurance products that support access to homeownership for all Canadians. But we do provide a number of specific products targeted to underserved areas, including First Nations on reserve, and have a number of products available there. And then in addition, I would add that we also have a number of skills on the job training, capacity programming as well that's targeted to on reserve.
Thanks, Lindsay. I'm going to go to an audience member here, Darlene Belrose. I'm going to just click my button here. And if you would be able to unmute, and you may ask your question. Oh, Darlene, are you there? Oh, okay, not a problem. Steve Arnett, you are up here next, and then I'll just ask you to unmute.
Hello.
Hi, Steve.
Hello.
Hi, Steve.
Yes.
Okay,
Can you
perfect.
hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. I was actually typing on. I'm wondering, we're working very hard here in Nanaimo on addressing the core housing needs of young moms with young children, one or more young children, who are in precarious housing to the degree that the state's looking at their ability to provide safe care for kids. And we're seeing that this precarious housing across the country is becoming the new neglect, particularly for picking up Indigenous children to the degree that, as Dr. Cindy Blackstone has said, is that Blackstock has said, we've got more kids in care, Indigenous kids in care today across the country than we had in at the height of the residential schools. And we are really, really concerned here that much of the funding, and I'll just give you an example, the seed funding and what have you, related to getting plans made and getting places built is such that when they're talking about servicing the debt on, we're not going to service the debt on a capital project with the rents you're going to be able to set for truly affordable, accessible housing for these young moms. So something has to change, and I'm wondering what resources are being directed towards recognizing that this need for core housing is also preventative, and that maybe we need to rethink capital resources allocations in such a way that we understand that nonprofits who build are not necessarily going to be able to as I said, service the large debt for a capital project on the basis of the types of rents you could and should be charging these young moms, which I think shouldn't be over $700 a month based on the data I've looked at for a 3-bedroom. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve.
So, I mean, and Steve, I can answer, I can't answer this question, unfortunately, but I totally agree with this point that, I think CMHC, we've, always focused on the actual, like the physical structure of the housing and financing that. But I think what's being pointed out here is that we need to have a more holistic view of housing as part of sort of a network of other social services that we provide to Canadians, and that CMHC needs to do a better job of working better across with other federal and provincial and territorial partners, and also Indigenous governments and housing providers to make these connections and to think about funding from a more holistic perspective. So I think I totally agree with that. It's easy to say, hard to do, but we absolutely take your point that this is a very important thing to consider.
Thanks, Romy. Louise Atkins asks, so the CHRA and the Indigenous Caucus have pressed for a budget 2021 announcement with a large funding commitment for Earn Indigenous housing. Can you offer any assurance that the Earn strategy will be Indigenous designed, governed, and operated?
So clearly, anything that's sort of in a future budget, the CMHC is not privy to disclose. But I think I'd like to turn it over to Krista Taylor, who is very familiar with this particular file, and she may be able to provide some insights into how we're working with the government on this.
Yeah, sure. I guess the first thing I would say is that our minister, in his mandate letter, which is public, there is a commitment and a specific wording. We're still trying to clarify the scope and get direction from government. But what it does say is that he would support the Indigenous Services Canada minister in the development of an urban Indigenous distinction-based housing strategy. And so, but the reality is we do know that, the approaches on the ground tend to be pan-Indigenous and serve all Indigenous peoples when it comes to urban settings or other settings as well. A lot of the vast majority of the housing providers, and I think this came out as well as in some of the research we supported to CHRA's Indigenous Caucus and the survey that they undertook, is the vast majority of housing providers serve in a pan-Indigenous way. And so while there's been no formal mandate given to our minister yet or CMHC to launch kind of discussions on a fourth strategy, some are calling it, or urban rural northern strategy, or whether it's just an urban Indigenous housing strategy, we're waiting to hear more from the centre and from government on kind of the scope. But that being said, it would be our commitment and full intention to have it be very much an Indigenous driven and led process. We are obviously in discussions with various partners and stakeholders and at various tables. It was mentioned previously, I co-chair with the Congress of Aboriginal People a newly formed housing working group to discuss some of the key barriers and gaps to accessing housing, and so very pleased to be part of that process. But we're hopeful that we'll hear something in a budget. We don't know. It's not our decision to make, but fingers crossed. Who knows where this will head? And certainly, I think there's a real acknowledgement of the need. And certainly thank you all again for all of your hard work over many, many years. I've participated over the years in many of CHRA's Indigenous Caucus in-person sessions. And thank you again for inviting us today. And we do read carefully the submissions that you provide. Just wanted to say that as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Krista. Romy, this question is for you from Shane Peltier. Can you speak to the amount of requested RHI funding from applicants up to the deadline at the end of December, and if the requests outpaced available funding, and if so, by how much?
Yeah. So yeah, thank you, Shane, and nice to see you. I think I had just spoken to Shane very recently, so greetings from Toronto. And we're still processing the application, so I don't have an exact number for you, but I can tell you that the request for funding was in many multiples of the actual funding that's available. So the demand was great. So that's, but we will provide more specific numbers in the coming weeks. So thank you very much for that question.
Thank you. The next question I have here is from Sarah. How does CMHC define affordable housing?
So I think maybe Krista is the best person to answer this from a policy perspective, because I know there's very different lenses on this. So maybe Krista, you can provide a little bit of overview of how we look at that definition.
Yeah, that's a very, very good question, because I don't think there is one common affordability definition, affordable housing definition across the country, or within, I would say, CMHC. What we do know, what I can say is we have the core housing needs standard, and within that there's kind of 3 standards. One's around affordability, suitability, and adequacy. And when we talk about the affordability standard under core housing need, it has a specific definition that's really around the ability to spend 30% of your income on housing, and so it's within the market, and so that's the one definition. But certainly we do know, and our various programs do have different depths of affordability related to them. As you would all know, like our what we used to call social housing programs are now community housing programs, serve a deeper kind of housing need and level of affordability than some other programs that are more really rental supply programs like RCFI, for instance. And so there are different criteria under various programs depending on the policy, kind of public policy objective that we're trying to achieve. And so I know that that's not helpful. There's no one definition that we could really point to. There are different definitions, but the core housing needs standard, I would say, is the most common one that we use.
Perfect. Thanks, Krista. Justin Marchand asks, what is the understanding of the difference between a distinctions-based earned Indigenous and a distinct earned Indigenous housing strategy? And how do you see earned Indigenous housing providers contributing in the future?
And Krista, I think this some of this language might be from the mandate letters. I don't know if that's. I think it's a request for clarification of that.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear actually the views of everyone we have here today on that, and get actually thoughts and ideas on that. We're still trying to clarify it as well in terms of the mandate letter language. And so I don't really have an answer on that for you, but certainly we would, I think as Romy was saying previously, there's so many different interests in this space, whether it's either just urban or in the north or kind of rural, remote areas. We would foresee not being able to say for sure definitively that there would be a need for comprehensive cross-country engagement on an Indigenous kind of led forest strategy if one were to be declared or announced, or if the government decides to kind of announce that there will be an engagement process. And so, you know, because there are not only different national Indigenous organizations and national Indigenous women's organizations as well, because there's close ties to shelters and other issues there. But also we know that there are many housing providers and associations across the country, and service providers as well, like the friendship centers as well. And so it's a complex and dynamic space. And then we also have the provinces and territories who have longstanding relationships as well with many of the housing providers in their within their regions. And so I would anticipate that any kind of engagement would need to involve a whole range of players in the process, and really Indigenous led, and really there to listen, and reconciliation is obviously kind of a foundation behind our thinking here and also federal partners, I would say, because there are definitely some linkages to the distinction-based housing strategies in that, for instance, and I do not want to speak on behalf of AFN, but the Assembly of First Nations does say in their strategy that they purport to support their members no matter where they live. So there are linkages there as well.
Muted again. I'm not sure if Sally, if you did end up catching it. Sally just asked in the chat because some audio cut out. If you have an idea of when we would expect to see a strategy with a FIBI vision or an announcement of funds or an allocated amount of funds specific to earn Indigenous housing.
Thank you, Sally, for that question. And unfortunately, we don't have a specific date that we can say at this time, but you know, we hope it will be soon, but we can't provide any clarity on this at this time, unfortunately.
Oh, Sally. So I'll repeat, and Sally, if you need, I can also write this out for you. But at this time, it's not. There's not an exact date that can be provided. Darlene, you started to type a question in the question box. Will CMHC be offering? If you're available there to update that for me, I can go ahead and ask the rest of the question. And if folks have questions, feel free again to add them to the question and answer box, or in the chat, or to raise your hand. I guess, Lindsay, I'll come to you with another one. I know there's no full announcement yet on RHI projects, but are there any projects co-investment, like, because when we last spoke, you gave us a couple different projects that had been part of co-investment. Are there any new projects that you can speak to for co-investment or even possibly RHI?
Unfortunately, not RHI at this point. We're still reviewing all of the applications, but certainly pleased to see the response from Indigenous providers and organizations. With co-investment, something that we've been able to do this year is increase the amount of projects we funded in the North, which, you know, given the different construction seasons and some of the unique barriers faced across the territories for building new housing, it's been great that we've been able to move forward with projects in each of the territorial capitals this year, including 100+ unit seniors building up in Yellowknife. The other thing we've really focused in on this year is addressing the needs of rural and remote communities. We know that there are some unique barriers that Indigenous providers serving these areas of the country face in accessing our programs. And so we've done 2 in rural communities in Saskatchewan this past year, Pine House and Meadow Lake. And we've also done a few in Northern Ontario. So really trying to expand the scope of the program, the range of projects that we're supporting, and then sharing these successes with other Indigenous providers, you know, through your network and through the various organizations that we work with, so they can see, you know, what's been possible and some of the projects that have been funded and how to work with us. So yeah, it's been quite a range of projects, but certainly pleased with the progress.
Perfect. I have a question from Arlene here. In the North, do you consider government-directed housing authorities as community-based and Indigenous-led, or as government?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And we do have a government relations team that works directly with each of the territorial housing corporations. You know, I would say, it might sound simplistic, but we work with anybody who's looking to work with us. My group works with Indigenous and non-Indigenous community groups, governments, organizations across the territories that are interested in working with us on funding a project. But we do have various other teams within CMHC as well that have that government to government relationship.
Okay, and Arlene followed up here. So just giving an example, seniors housing in Yellowknife is not Indigenous led, but serves Indigenous populations. So we're just interested in how CMHC might ensure groups demonstrate that they take an Indigenous led approach when serving Indigenous communities.
Yeah, and sometimes it depends on the level of detail that's put into an application, but we do work, our client-facing specialists, so all the Indigenous and Northern specialists on my team work closely with proponents on the application, and wherever possible, we do encourage culturally sensitive or community-based, community-led designs for housing projects where possible. But we also, work with other partners. I mentioned the territorial housing corporations and municipalities, and look to encourage, the right partners coming to the table, supporting Indigenous-led projects. Within our group, we do support projects that are Indigenous-led, but also projects from other groups that have majority of units dedicated to serving Indigenous housing needs. So we're really trying to prioritize across the spectrum and working with various partners.
Okay, and I'll give one last follow-up with that. Has there been much community engagement in the North as well? Just really because government-funded groups which are not Indigenous led have had a lot of access to the conversation versus some of maybe the community membership. So has there been much work done in community membership?
So there's been a lot of community outreach. That's why we're adding another Northern housing specialist to our team. We do have one specialist located up in the Northwest Territories who's been very busy traveling to some of the remote Indigenous communities as well, promoting the programs that we deliver, talking to them about their housing projects and goals to see what funding options we might be able to bring to the table. And we also have a specialist dedicated to the Yukon, and we are just in the process of filling a position for a specialist in Nunavut, so that we are able to continue that outreach with community groups.
And then she just asked, and Lindsay, I'm not sure if you see in the chat just who the specialist is in the NWT. So if you want to provide, if you can provide that, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. It's Bright Lubanza, and I can follow up with his contact information, Arlene, if you like.
Okay, thanks, Lindsay. So I have another question here. So the key to successful housing for marginalized tenants is support. It's very difficult to receive funding from any level of government to hire housing support workers to work with tenants at risk of eviction for any number of reasons, to help them navigate replacing ID, referring them to programming that they may require, teaching them how to budget and run household, and being mentors to them. Has there been any discussions at CMHC in regards to support systems?
I think this one probably Krista's maybe in the best position to support in terms of like working with the SDC and some of the programs that they have there. I'm not sure if you can comment on that, Krista.
Yeah, so at CMHC, we typically fund, as Romy I think said earlier, the capital construction costs or the capital costs for repairs, renovations, home modifications, and the like, and not funding for supports and services. Also, although I would say we have funded capacity building and training for housing managers and building skills in the trades areas, as was mentioned under the housing internship for Indigenous youth, but not so much on the support and services side. So I would say that ESDC, through their Reaching Home program, which is focused more so on homelessness, may provide some of those kinds of services, or at least caseworkers and connections to those services, and perhaps also Indigenous Services Canada, or in the case on reserve, through the friendship centers. I'm not sure. I think that would be a follow-up question for Indigenous Services Canada, and we can give you contact there and follow up with you there as well to see if there's something through there as well, because the friendship centers also provide a lot of supports and services in the off-reserve context.
Thank you. Okay, last question, seeing the time there. So Louise Atkins asks, Krista, you referenced a table that you're co-chairing with CAP. Can Can you expand on the membership of that table, the duration and the goal of what that working group is doing?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I think, I'm not sure if we have members from the Congress of Aboriginal people here on the call today. We quite possibly do. It's a fairly new housing working group, and the origins of it are through the Canada CAP political accord. So Minister Bennett actually signed a political accord with the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples that outlined, how we will work together around a reconciliation, as well as some key priority areas where we agreed to work together. And so housing is one of a number of different areas underneath that. And there are working groups in other areas as well. So it's fairly new. We're just working together on the terms of reference for that group, and it's not been finalized yet. So I'm not really at liberty to share more broadly, but I think, it's trying to gain a better understanding, certainly, of the needs, the housing needs, the barriers to accessing housing, including our programs, and where the gaps are and how we can collaborate through that. CMHC also has a Part 9 research program, and we've used that in the past to both support CHRA's Indigenous Caucus research, that survey as well, that was undertaken, I guess, over a year ago now, as well as we're supporting research as well for the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples and other research on Indigenous housing.
Perfect. Thanks, Krista. That's exactly how I would have shared it as well. Because actually, I think we do have a couple members from CAP here, because CAP recently became a member of the CHRA late last year. So I believe they're here if they were invited. So, so thank you so much. That's all I have for the questions. Lindsay, Romy, Krista, thank you so much as always. It's always really great to have you join us and give an update to the Indigenous Caucus and CHRA members. We so appreciate the relationship that we've been able to develop with CMHC, and we definitely hope to continue that relationship and we can keep providing feedback, and always glad to have you come and speak whenever that works for you.
Yeah. Thanks so much, and please invite us back anytime. We're always very happy to speak to everyone here.
Perfect. So that's all for me. So just a reminder, we did record this, so it'll be up on our website in the coming days, and we'll tweet a link out to it as well. So to everyone who joined us today, thank you so much. Panelists, thank you again. I know I say thank you a lot. It's just I guess being Canadian. So thank you so much, and everyone have a great rest of your day, and hopefully a new excellent weekend coming up on the weekend.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so
Bye,
much.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.